Funny idea, right? That thinking about the future can be harmful. Well, bear with me, and let me show you why this may be the case, for at least some of you. The future is that promising yet daunting place that is constantly on the horizon. It's where our dreams are born, our plans emerge, and our alternate stories play out. However, we don't often stop to think about that place, and why we even go there. And if we do, we often reassure ourselves that what we're doing is productive. It's to create a plan, to not be reckless and blind to our actions. Or we just dismiss it as a silly and harmless fantasy that we play out in our mind. But as with anything, the dosage and the method matter. Drink too much water, you overhydrate and can die. Switch completely from bottled or treated water to natural springs and streams, and your chances for illness increase significantly. Very, very few of us consider what a harmful dose of partaking in future thinking might look like, and if such a limit even exists. I'm going to explore this from two angles. One will be more practical, and based on nuanced issues of future planning in the environment that you find yourself in, that being the beginning of the 21st century. The other angle will be more personal, looking at how we formulate our dreams and aspirations. Arguably, it's more timeless and applicable to you, but will be heavily dependent on the makeup of your personality. So, let's get started. The planning fallacy, developed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, proposes that due to their cognitive bias, people have a tendency to underestimate the time and resources required to achieve their future plans. What resonated with me most about this concept was the element of inaccuracy and bias. We construct our future plans in the moment where we possess the least amount of data or experience, and just like in the Dunning-Kruger effect, those who know the least can fall prey to overconfidence and therefore error. And that's the basis for my argument, that the longer you plan into the future, in detail, the more error-prone your formulation will be, simply due to the dynamic character of human society in the 21st century and the chaotic nature of reality itself. Some of you may argue that certain things run in a linear fashion and therefore are predictable. When you become a doctor, you have a near step-by-step schedule for life. Same with joining the military or becoming a lawyer. Thus, a detailed long-term plan for the future can be realized. And you make a fair point. However, I'd argue that this is now starting to become an exception to the rule, as opposed to the rule itself, in many, but not all industries, the extent of which will also depend on the unique characteristics of the economy you function in. Throughout most of human history, the technological change between generations was minimal. A farmer in the Middle Ages would have most likely used the same technology as their grandparents, but now, an entire industry can arise and collapse within a single generation. And so, we now live in the age of disruption and change. Our economies are only becoming more and more dynamic as the years pass. And in the majority of cases, it is those that are agile and adaptable that see success in the market. Let's say that 10 years ago, in 2012, I was to sit down and make a vigorous 10-year plan of where I wanted to be in the future. I'd plan out what jobs I should do, where I should live, the companies I should invest in, or even create myself. Well, we are now in 2022, so we have the luxury of hindsight of the hurdles that plan would have faced. 2012 was one of the first years of mass adoption of the smartphone in the West. By that factor alone, I could have never foreseen and planned for all the ways the smartphone reshaped society. I couldn't account for the growth and total dominance of companies like Google or Amazon, as well as the downfall of giants like BlackBerry or Toys R Us, the decline of companies like Vine, and from it, a subsequent rise of TikTok, the resurgence of cities like Detroit, and the decline of cities like San Francisco. The list goes on and on. Additionally, notice how, in the plan, I also assumed that I knew exactly what job I wanted to do in 10 years' time, setting a future for myself in the moment where I knew the least about my career likes and dislikes, and in a way giving myself no real way to pivot or change because of the highly engineered nature of long-term planning. All the stress and effort in making a meticulously constructed plan, only for it to start to crumble due to the changing circumstances that I could have never foretold from the zeitgeist I constructed it in. You may say, well, all is good for me. I'm planning to go into an industry that is very stable, so I need not to worry. You may be right, but don't get too comfortable. While certain industries like medicine and law are protected by regulations and licensing that maintain its stability, it doesn't mean elements of those industries are immune from drastic change. Take paralegals as an example. They are a junior position within law firms and a common entry into law. They are hired to discover, index, and process information, a time-consuming and labor-intensive job, but also one that is very easy to automate. And thus, many law firms have already started the process of adopting AI to do the same work. And in a decade's time, paralegals may be replaced by AI, or a smaller number of paralegals may work in support of an AI system in most law firms. The other thing to consider is the prevalence of black swan events. A black swan event is a metaphor used to describe events that are unpredictable, rare, that surprise you, or have a major effect and consequences that were unforeseen. I think we can all think of one that happened not too long ago. Now, there are debates around black swan events, with some saying that they can only be negative and others saying they can be positive as well, and questions about how severe the consequences have to be in order to classify as one. But that debate is not for this video. We're just going to borrow this concept to highlight some factors. So let's say you are 4 years into that plan that we wrote back in 2012. And you know what? You've been thriving and things have so far gone as planned. You're in the company you planned to get into, you're in the city you wanted to be in, and you have a great relationship with the senior manager in your division who took you under his wing and who you really appreciate. The next thing you know, you get a company email stating that he's resigning. Now, this doesn't jeopardize your plans, but it certainly will slow down the process. Next week, you get a phone call from him. He's setting up his own startup, and he's trying to collect a bunch of new talent for his venture that is heavily backed by investment. He really wants you there, and you have the skills he needs. You'll get compensated better, enjoy more company benefits, and it'll be a more senior role that would take you another 2 years to reach at the current company you're in. But it's in a completely different industry, and a completely different role, and a completely different location, something that does not fit your plan. In your plan, you wanted to climb up the corporate ladder of the current company you are in, and in the industry you're in, and in the city you are in. You've already put 4 years into this plan, and this move, whilst actually fast-tracking your wealth and seniority, detracts from that plan and ruins all your other plans that you had lined up for you in the next 6 years. Whether the sunk cost would stop you from jumping on this opportunity or not is a personal preference, and I have to admit that there's no definitive right answer. However, what I wish to highlight is the unpredictability of the future. Tomorrow, you may come across the opportunity of a lifetime, or the industry that you wish to break into might get permanently disrupted. Wait. So what you're saying is that we should have no plan? That we should just blindly do whatever and put no thought into anything? No. This is not to say that you should have no plan, but creating a long-term plan that doesn't allow for any adaptation or is heavily reliant on hundreds of factors in the future going a certain way is a risky bet, and it could stop you from exploiting great opportunities or changing course from a direction that looks worse day by day. Think of it like predicting the weather. We can predict what will happen today, the short term. We have a rough prediction of what will happen this week, the medium term. But a month from now, let alone a year, at best you can get a rough abstraction of what it could be like based on averages. And so, if we follow the weather example in terms of how much detail we go into, we can better navigate our dynamic world. The further out you plan, the more abstract and general your plan should be. The abstraction offers you agility and flexibility. If you plan this way, you'll be better adapted to possible disruptions and also jump onto or be on the lookout for unexpected opportunities without being held back by a rigidly constructed plan. But we'll return to this point in a moment. When we talk to others about us thinking about our future, we often paint a picture of us sitting down in deep thought in our study room, figuring out what we'd like our life to be like. But let's face it, for many of us, our thoughts about the future come from passive daydreams in the most random places and moments. Thus, it is often an unstructured and organic process, one that is subject to the whims of the mind. And that is where the potential issue lies, our lack of awareness and control. Now, some of you may instantly object and say, "What are you on about? This is great. We are utilizing the creativity and problem-solving abilities of our unconscious mind to generate new ideas." And again, you would be right. There isn't a problem with utilizing the capabilities of the mind in this way. But again, we almost never consider the possible negatives of letting our mind run rampant and unchecked. This ability is a double-edged sword, not a butter knife. And it's a double-edged sword because, if unchecked, your brain will soon merge thoughts of the future with fantasy, blurring the line between what your mind assesses as realistically achievable. Let's work with some examples. As you imagine your future, you'll picture scenarios of you sealing the business deal of your life, or making that important speech that captures everyone, or you're enjoying the fruits of your labor in a carefree, hedonistic manner. In each, it'll be beyond real, as no one stops halfway into a daydream to critique our mind for its lack of realism in its imagination. When sealing the deal, your pitch is perfect and received without doubt or questioning, or at least the questions that you do get are predictable and your comebacks are impeccable. When making that important speech, your words cascade in an unquestionable flow. The audience is fully engaged. An energy emanates from you that captures the moment in the most perfect way. You are received in a sea of applause, tears, and compliments of gratitude. When enjoying the fruits of your labor, there is an absolute focus on your reward. It is offered to you on a silver platter. It is earned. You deserve it with every fiber of your being. To many, these examples are thought of as the place of reward. This is what awaits you at the end of the road or the goal that you are pursuing. But in reality, it'll also act as a reminder of where you are not. And the consequences of thinking about the future only in terms of positives and rewards is an aspect we don't take into consideration. I mean, think about it. In these examples I just mentioned, you've never stepped a foot wrong. You became a billionaire in your 20s and 30s. You never had to face thousands of hours of research, work and dedication to create your ideal product or plan. Heaven forbid that after all this effort, there was even a doubt from the investors about the viability of your product. In the second example, all of a sudden you are a master orator. The true power of your words is never questioned, as you are the only person listening to that speech in a dreamlike state. You have a perfectly skewed audience that are created by your brain with all of its preferences. We haven't even asked what you must achieve in order to garner an audience that would take time out of their lives to listen to what you have to say. In the last example, you don't have to think about your obligations that day. You don't have to dwell on the idea that this reward is going to run out. You don't have to deal with the fickle nature of hedonistic pleasures. You don't have to go through all the hard work that would grant you such a reward in the first place. And so, your brain just got a taste of that reality from an unrealistic world that is better than our one without having to exert any real world effort. So when you do get yourself on the path of this goal and you face the inevitable setbacks, challenges, or negative hardships, you freak out. Well, wait, this wasn't mentioned. Oh my goodness, I've only just started and I'm already struggling. And so, you start to doubt your abilities. You start to doubt the journey ahead, and you consider backing out. Recall how I mentioned that the makeup of your personality will have an impact on how this affects you. Well, I'd like to highlight how such a difference could play out in a situation like this. For those of you average or high in trait conscientiousness, this sort of unrealistic ideal might act as a warning light or a mental push in the direction of action, and so you may come to the conclusion that this is a good thing. Whilst it certainly is better than nothing in the immediate term, such a method of negative motivation becomes questionable as a long-term solution. I mean, think about it. Who will perform better? A worker under constant threat of redundancy and constant reminders of their inadequacy, or a worker motivated with adequate goals and recognition of their efforts? Which one will have to rely more on willpower over time? Who is more likely to face burnout? Who's more likely to willingly go above and beyond? Whose journey will be more enjoyable and meaningful? Remember, you'll be comparing yourself to an unrealistic fantasy, meaning you'll never reach it, meaning that even if by all measures you are successful, it's still not as successful as the fantasy world. And we only need to look at the story of Icarus to understand where this can lead us to. For those below average or lower in conscientiousness, this sort of unrealistic ideal might instead act as a source of paralysis. Feeling stuck, it doesn't motivate you to act. It takes your attention away from the present, the only arena in which you actually exist and can make change, and it pulls you into the future through anxiety, which almost always focuses on the future consequences of doing or not doing an action, preventing you from making any sensible steps forward. As, well, what's the point? It won't even make a dent in the distance between where I am and where I could have been had I had the superhuman progress of my fantasies. This perspective is one we share in many other areas. We are all talking about the negative effects of unrealistic beauty standards seen on social media and the havoc it wreaks on the general self-esteem of the population. We see it in the unhealthy diets and doctoring of images of models and the secret use of performance-enhancing drugs by athletes and influencers, all of which present a false distortion of reality online, which then normal people try to reach or compare themselves to, as it's been presented to them as natural and therefore attainable. As a consequence, we see spikes in eating disorders, the use of performance-enhancing drugs by young people. And it's a similar story with our example here. The core issue is the unrealistic nature of our thoughts about the future. The thoughts themselves are normal. We all have them and will keep on having them. And they'll be a tool that we use forever. But there is a line after which these thoughts can become self-destructive. So, what do we do? Well, I think for most of you it's quite obvious. There is no single method or structure to fix this. It's all dependent on you, your personality, habits, lifestyle, goals, aspirations, etc., etc. Someone working in a creative field will probably spend more time trying to utilize their mind and the ability to come up with creative solutions to plans, more than someone who's working in accounting, while someone working in accounting will be able to more accurately construct a viable plan into the future with confidence. So there is no golden rule. It's a personal question. At what point do you see it affecting you negatively? Which again requires self-exploration. It certainly does not mean stop all future planning and fantasizing. That's jumping from one extreme to the other. The answer is somewhere in between. Oh, come on, you saw it coming too.
Well, why you boring me? I'm right.
As always, there are some pointers and examples we can look to for inspiration. Let's start with rigid future plans. Like we discussed previously, focusing your plans around the medium to short term is a good start. So, we go into great detail with our actions in the short term and with lesser detail in the medium term, whilst leaving long-term plans to be abstract and non-specific. A general direction that could be centered around a single goal. It could be, I want to run my own business in the tech sector. I want to be fit enough to compete in a sporting event, or I'd like to start my own family or own property. And as you progress closer to that goal, you are able to get into more detail as you'll have better information and understanding of how that ultimate goal can be realistically achieved. A more organized form of planning could implement a regular review process. In this example, every 3 to 6 months you sit down to reflect on what you've done in the last 3 to 6 months and plan what you're going to try to achieve or move towards over the coming 3 to 6 months. It could be in relation to an abstract goal of yours, general progression in certain fields, or the extent to which you lived by your values. It gives you regular milestones to work towards. Ones that are realistic and updated to constantly react to changes in your life, your career, and the economy you operate in. This is just one example of how, by shifting your focus to the short and medium term, you can still aim for long-term goals without needing to create rigid and overly engineered plans. As we discussed, in certain industries like medicine or law, there is a set structure, and so they are unlikely to change as drastically as some other industries. But I would still add that there are ample opportunities in many of these industries that we don't know of that are yet to come. If we take the example of the medical field, many doctors have recently entered the science communication realm, which was almost non-existent 5 years ago, whilst others may find that industries such as management consulting are now eagerly looking for their skills and knowledge, should they ever wish to change industries. As for those whose issues lie in the blurred borders of future aspiration and fantasy, increasing awareness is key, as this is an internal matter. The more aware you are, the better you'll be at catching a runaway thought or spotting an expectation or goal that is mired in fantasy and is unachievable. Here, sitting and reflecting intently or engaging in journaling can be helpful. So ask yourself this: why do I fantasize? What purpose does it play in my life? When I do fantasize, are there any triggers or cues that repeatedly occur when I delve into these fantasies? Have any of my fantasies ever played out like I imagined them to? And if you catch yourself in the moment, you could also ask, is this constructive visualization or an escape from reality? Is it actionable, achievable, or is it delving into make-believe? Now remember, if you actually want to fantasize, then go ahead, enjoy it. It's absolutely normal to do, but do it with intent and awareness. Knowingly acknowledge that you are delving into fantasy for recreation through thinking about the future. Just don't fool yourself by saying it's purely constructive. Know how these fantasies can at times get out of hand, either by compromising how you perceive any actions you do make, or by giving you a sense of having achieved something without needing to put in any effort. And if it does start to get out of hand, ask yourself this: what would you rather do? Make a step closer to bringing into reality your dream or ideal value or goal, or feel a smaller amount of satisfaction from fantasizing about it while making no progress and reinforcing an unrealistic expectation whose shadow will cover and dwarf any possible progress you may make in the real world. I hope this video has been helpful. If you'd like to see more videos like this, a like and a subscription would go a long way in supporting this channel. And for those wishing to further support me, my Ko-fi is linked in the description. You can also check out my other videos on the costs of losing your attention in the social media world. While for those of you that are interested in a deep dive explanation of maladaptive daydreaming, I recommend this video by Dr.K that further outlines the concept.